What's up, everyone? It is time to take a look at another team preparing for VCT Ascension Pacific. And this one, a lot of people have been asking, when can we hear about this team? When can we let the rest of the world know about this team? We want to see this video. We want to see this team featured. It's none other than Revenant Esports. Woo! For those who don't know, Revenant Esports comes out from India, representing the South Asia region. And there's definitely at least one name you're probably familiar with. It's none other than SkRossi. But before we talk in depth about SkRossi and his career and his journey, which I think is worth highlighting, let's talk overall about what the path kind of looked like. What has this year looked like for South Asia? Well, it all started last year with convergence during the off-season. There was a team, didn't have a coaching staff, that rose up through the Indian qualifiers and actually gave quite a bit of a fight. Some of the best games that we saw at that event against a couple of these partnership teams, one of them actually being Gen G. That team was not Revenant Esports. It was actually True Rippers, and they looked very promising. So a lot of eyes, I think, were on True Rippers, at least from outside of the region, looking in and saying, okay, like this is probably the team to kind of latch onto if you don't know much about the region, because they look like they have a pretty strong shot to go all the way through Challengers and have a shot at Ascension. Meanwhile, Revenant Esports does a full rebuild. They have a chance to pick up SkRossi. SkRossi comes in. He wants to go on his redemption arc. And then what caught my attention was Revenant Esports actually picked up Severine from Old Boom Esports, right? A veteran in the Valorant scene, a veteran overall in the esports scene. I mean, he's had IGLing experience as well. And I thought, okay, this is actually really good. Bringing in an experienced IGL, this could really be important for this region where, yes, every now and then we see talented players, but you just don't quite have the structure, the macro understanding, things like that. So Severine comes in, but kind of as a playing coach slash IGL, and you see the impact. There's definitely some better ideas that are coming out. There's some creativity. You can see different ideas in set play and comps, but there's also some messiness, right? A couple of these players like SkRossi are trying to learn new agents and new roles. It's not quite gelling well. There's still a lot of messy, kind of selfish plays. And I mean, I thought it was a promising start for a project, but it didn't look like it was going to go all the way to the top, and they didn't. They got quite far in the very first cup of Split 1, but not quite far enough. However, in Split 2, a couple changes happen. Sultan comes in as a player, replaces Severine, and then they actually get a coach in Fields coming over from EMEA. So let's take a look at the roster itself. Here are your 5 players representing Revenant Esports: Paradox, SkRossi, Skills, Sultan, and DOS9. Now, you're going to realize that the sheet looks a little different than it did for the other two teams, because the roles are kind of all over the place. I mean, okay, so Paradox is like your Raze, but also Neon Specialist, which, okay, that kind of makes sense. A little bit speedy, right? A bit more just kind of hard dive, creating those angles, things like that. Basically non-opping duelist, typically speaking. But then he sprinkles in a little bit of Harbor, some Breach every now and then, right? He'll play what needs to be done. And then you got SkRossi. In the beginning of the year, he was learning a lot of Sova, and now he's kind of the Gecko main, but whenever you're playing maps with Jet, like, he's still the go-to Jet. And then he played a couple games of Chamber as well on Lotus. So the vibe I'm getting is, okay, you want him to be the Opper, because when he's on Gecko, he's pulling a little something, a little Paper X something, and playing that operator Gecko. Skills is now the main initiator, which, okay, that's cool. That makes it very clear. And I do think that's very important to kind of have your main info initiator be someone consistent, because that way they're always going to be in that mode of, I got to get a read on the game, read on the map. All right, that works for me. And then there's Sultan and DOS9, where, like, Sultan, okay, there's some, like, Viper is a bit of a sentinel, so there's some consistency, but then other times he's playing the Omen, so it looks like he's kind of the main controller, but then he's also playing the Cypher, but he doesn't play the Killjoy, which DOS9 does. But then DOS9 will pick up the ISO whenever they need a little bit more firepower to kind of support the Jet. And then DOS9 also plays the Viper. So, yeah. I do think when you take a look at the way they play, there's definitely certain styles. Like, Paradox, at the end of the day, seems to kind of be the supporting character, right? Either creating space or going in for extra trades. SkRossi does seem to just be the main opera. Like, that's his big thing. And then he'll play whichever agent that can accommodate that during it. Obviously, skills we talked about as the initiator, so that works. And then Sultan and Dust9 are both kind of the strong lurkers and anchors. Sultan, very much the lurker. I thought about just putting lurker in his description here, but obviously it depends on kind of the side you're playing and the maps you're playing. But these are the two where this team kind of feels comfortable saying, okay, you guys control this part of the map on your own. You're like our fraggers that's going to get control just through your mechanical skills. But Dust9 gives me a little bit of the Crystal vibes from last year's SkRossi's roster, where he'll just play whatever, right? He'll anchor, he'll lurk, he'll go in for trades, right? I mean, he'll be that fragger with the ISO. He'll do whatever it takes. So there's definitely some flexibility on this roster. It's not hard set. We'll see if that changes going into Ascension, because it has been a little bit of time. So continuing on with the journey of Revenant Esports throughout the South Asian Challenger scene, South Asia, first of all, had a bit of an interesting format. So they had 2 cups during Split 1, basically 2 tournaments during Split 1, and then they had Split 2. And a lot of these were kind of tournament formats. You had group stages, but split into 2 groups. So not everyone was playing everyone in each split. And then you had the playoffs. So that's just a side note, but it's not like a complicated circuit point system. At the end of the day, Revenant Esports is here because they won Split 2, and they got that chance to be the representatives for the South Asian circuit. Now, I think the biggest thing that a lot of people saw was that, okay, like, Revenant has an interesting story, right? You're picking up SkRossi's, and in the beginning of the year, you brought in Severine. You have Skills, who was also with Global Esports for the longest time. Like, there's a lot of interesting stories, and you're bringing these 2 guys from Kazakhstan, Sultan and Dust9, who look like they're very, very promising fraggers. So there's a story to follow, but at least in the beginning of the year, it was like, okay, we see potential, some cool ideas, but you're just not quite cutting it at the end, right? You're doing pretty well during the group stages, during the round robin, and then not quite cutting it during the playoffs. But hey, you only need to win the one match that matters. And they did that. And I honestly am a little interested. I wonder if we'll ever get to hear how much of an impact Coach Fields had coming into this team. I wasn't very familiar with Fields, but Fields used to be a coach out of EMEA. In fact, he was coaching XL during the Valorant regional leagues in 2022 when Patty Tech was on that roster as well. So now, for those who aren't as familiar with the local scenes, there's a little bit of an extra link. But anyway, so he comes in. He's definitely had experience, just not at a tier 1 global level. But I gotta say, whether it's him, whether it's the roster, whether it's just simply the addition of Sultan, whatever it might be, this team is starting to play off of each other a lot. There's a lot of good trading setups being done. There's a lot of baiting for a teammate. I mean, not as much ego. And then you've got, again, people like Sultan and Dust9 who seem very reliable as solo fraggers, where you can just say, okay, we took this space, we're going to leave you here, you're going to lock this down with your aim, and then we're going to go elsewhere. So I think this team has now come together a bit more as a team. The comms seem to be there a little bit more. They're playing off of each other, you know, whether it's the utility, whether it's the crossfires. It all looks pretty darn good. And I think that helped them get over the hump in the playoffs of Split 2. And I think also just kind of the passion to really want to get all the way to Ascension carries them all the way through. And here they are representing South Asia. So obviously I've repeatedly mentioned a couple names, but who really are the key players to watch for? The 2 players to focus for. Quite frankly, I actually think this is a roster where you could pick any of the 5 and you can make an argument on why you should watch out for them. But the 2 I'm going to pick are going to be Dust9, and we gotta pick SkRossi's. Let's start with Dust9. First of all, this dude's agent pool, it's all over the place. I mean, he will play anything and everything. He's also just an insane fragger. You look at the stats that they have in the grand finals of stage 2, it's a 3-0, and Dust9 goes plus 22, 60 and 38. Right? And he's playing Brimstone and ISO. So he is fragging out. And I think having someone like that, and this is why I'm saying it gives me a lot of Crystal vibes from SkRossi's last year, where Crystal was bouncing around all the different roles while also IGLing actually for that team. Just because of that, right? Because of the fragging power he had, he could kind of make any agent work and create extra space, create extra trades, things like that. And having someone there where he's not the main dive duelist, but he's always there to trade and or go on lurks and anchors, is so valuable because it gives you an extra life, so to speak, throughout the round. And basically, that's actually your really big win condition, and everything else is there to kind of set the whole round up. So I think DOS9 is the guy to be looking at. I mean, if you can shut him down, I think it weakens Revenant Esports quite a bit. Not just because, like, you know, the fragging power of the other teammates, but also just because I think his fragging opens up the map a lot and allows them to play the map the way they want. So DOS9, I mean, first of all, I'm interested, what is he going to be playing? Right? I mean, are we going to see more ISO? What's he going to pick up? That's just going to be a surprise box, and that should be an exciting aspect. But also, can he keep up that level of fragging when you're playing against the best of all the other regions? Now, when it comes to SkRossi, I mean, a big part of it is because of the storyline, right? I mean, he's hailed as this prodigy, the prince who's supposed to bring attention to Indian Valorant, and he did do that. He succeeded in that. But also, when he finally got that chance to be at the top level at VCT Pacific, it does not go well. He has a bit of a fall from grace. Now he's going back on a redemption arc. In the beginning of the year, looks like he's really just going to focus on, you know, learning Initiator. He's picking up the Sova. It looks still pretty rough. And there's still some times where, you know, he's like picking up Ops and Marshals, and you're wondering, like, is this really the way you're supposed to be playing that Sova in this composition? And you start to wonder, are the habits just too locked in, right? Is he going to be able to escape from this? Well, Revenant finds a solution, and they say, okay, you know what? You will be our opper. You'll be the op guy. We're going to let you op, right? And we're going to find agents that work for you. If it's the Jet, it's the Jet. If it's the Gecko, it's the Gecko. If it's the Chamber, it's the Chamber. And I will say there are still a couple times where it's like, all right, you're kind of forcing the spy. You're kind of forcing this position where SkRossi will still kind of get ahead. But I will also say I noticed a significant number of rounds where, thinking back, like, old SkRossi would have greeted for these kills. He would have ego peeked, he would have re-peeked, but now he's like waiting for his teammates. His teammates are baiting for him, and he gets the kill off of that. I think he's been able to figure out that he doesn't need to always do everything on his own, which I think is a huge benefit for a player that's so young, that probably had so much pressure on him to always have to overperform for the rest of the region. So while it's not 100%, and while, again, like things like waiting for your teammates and peeking together, these all sound simple, but these were bad habits that he had just ingrained into his system. So to see that he has, you know, made a lot of improvements in that sense, I think it's a huge promise. And I want to know, when the pressure starts to hit, right, at Ascension, you're playing against some of the best players of the other regions, can he still keep that cool? Can he still be patient, wait for the team, play with the team? I think that's a big question. And my other question is he still going to be that Jet specialist, and are they going to have other options? Because to me, if I'm an opponent of Revenant Esports, I want to take them to a Jet map, right? Because those are maps where SkRossi is going to feel more pressure to have to perform, because he's playing that duelist. Every duelist says it, that they feel a lot of pressure when they're playing that role. You can force them into those positions, and then if you shut down the operator or you shut down their economy, it really ruins the game. And we saw that when they were playing the Icebox. I will take a look at the map pool here in a little bit, but I do wonder if they're going to have some other options for him, you know, whether it's something like the Chamber, whether it's the Gecko and trying to work around other duelists, or if it's a matter of, you know, having a bit more support right behind him in the form of something like the ISO or something like that. So speaking of compositions and strengths and weaknesses, let's take a look at the map pool. Obviously, again, I think this is going to be the similar story for everybody that's coming up into this tournament. It's that they have very, very good win rates on most of these maps. However, there's two things I want to note about Revenant Esports' map pool. One is that they've played every map but Abyss in Stage 2. And they actually played Split on top of this. So this is huge. The fact that they were willing, that they felt so confident that they were willing to play every map, that there wasn't a strict permaban, and they still have a positive win rate, albeit very small sample sizes, just because they've spread it out across all the picks, it's a good sign. I'm not going to go ahead and say that it's like super impressive, but it is impressive nonetheless, because it shows that you were willing to continue to try to stay ahead across all points. We also have to remember South Asia ended their circuit a long time ago as well. So Abyss wasn't even in the pool back then. Now we'll see they've had so much time to watch and prep. They've had so much time to fix some of their other maps as well. This is big news. But take a look at the maps that aren't 100%. Ascent and Icebox. 2 maps where Jet is a focus and you don't have to have hard rotates just because of a fake. Because here's the thing about Revenant. Their macro is a little bit simplistic, right? It's very much, hey, we're going to have 1 or 2 lurkers, right? I mean, if it's bind, obviously you kind of go for 2 lurks on 2 different lanes out of the 4. But other maps, you kind of put someone mid, you put someone on the other side, and then you kind of fake out here, and then you rotate over to the lurk. Or that's when you leave the lurk, and it's always just this kind of one big rotation. And it works because they have players like Sultan or Dust9 or, you know, sometimes some of the other players that are able to get some of these impact frags on their lurks, and that'll still keep the opponents on their toes. But again, what happens when you're playing against teams that kind of read into this and they say, okay, we don't need to overreact on your first set of utility, right? Either we can just choose to play retake, or we just wait and say, okay, you're going for that big retake. Now what are you going to do? Because it's pretty readable. Their patterns are pretty readable across the different maps. And I want to go ahead and say that I want to say the losses coming out from Ascent and Icebox is partially because of this, right? The combination of having to play a jet-centric map, but also the opponents not having to overreact too much if they don't have other preparation, I think allows for the answers to be found a bit quicker. So curious to see if they're going to mix things up. And also, my big question is how sustainable is this agent swapping all the time? In theory, I kind of like it. I mean, at the end of last year, I and some other people that I talked to thought this would be the future of Valorant, where it's like, okay, you're playing certain styles as a player, but sometimes that means you're going to have to play an initiator. Sometimes you have to play a sentinel. Sometimes you have to play a duelist. So you're going to be bouncing around. And there are some like specialty roles, right? Whether it's like a hard anchor sentinel, you know, whether it's pure info initiator, or whether it's like dive duelist, like those might need someone to be specialized in that one specific kind of agent role. But I would have thought that we would have moved more in this direction, where it's a lot more flexibility in agent pool. And I don't think we actually saw that evolution as much as I expected in 2024. And yet here we are with Revenant, where I'm going to go ahead and say that I think it's partially due to their comfort picks, but if they're making it work, can they prove that it's sustainable, or does it hit a wall when you're going up against other people who really break down your VODs? So that's just a quick overview and preview of Revenant coming out from India, representing the South Asian circuit. I just want to say, I hope that they do well. Even if they don't win, I hope they have some of the best games that we've seen. I hope they show some interesting comps. I hope they have really good team play highlights, because I think that would do so much for not just their own local regional scene, but also for Pacific overall, to prove that we really are all growing together and improving all together, because I think that's very important to keep up the motivation. And here's the thing, there was just so much hype behind Indian Valorant in the beginning, right? Behind SkRossi's, behind Global Esports. And quite frankly, a lot of that has fizzled out. And SkRossi's here going on a redemption arc, and you love to see it. I love to see it. I would love for it to continue on a positive arc. It doesn't have to find its conclusion just yet, but I just hope it doesn't crash and burn. And I carefully say, from what I saw in the playoffs from this team, I think you can hope that it will be positive. I'm not going to go so far to say that I'm going to put them in my favorites roster, but there is definitely reason to be hopeful for this team. And I'm curious what you think. If you've been following this team, or just from what you saw during this video, how hopeful are you for Revenant Esports? Can we see Indian Valorant make a splash again on a global stage, on a global scale? Let me know down in the comments below, and let me know, do you think they can beat some Prisa Gaming? Because that's the team we're going to cover in the next video. We'll see you then.